Hi, I'm Freya. You don't know me, but if you saw this in your feed and you were upset, angry, or intrigued, please hear me out and be nice. Or don't, I don't really care. Before I get into that though, I would like to give myself a little introduction as this is my first video. Here's a timestamp to skip it though, if you'd like. As I said earlier, I am Freya. While this is my first video publicly, I've been a fan of the FNAF franchise since the first game came out, or at least since Mark started playing it. I've always loved theorizing alongside the Game Theorists, and recently channels like RyeToast, Dual Process Theory, ID's Fantasy, and many, many more. I've been making theories in the comments of these channels for years, so I figured it'd be a good idea to finally put them in video format. That being said, I've taken up enough of your time, so let's get into it. First off, I'd like to clarify what I meant in the title. After the lore update of Help Wanted 2 was released, many have come to the conclusion that the books are mostly, if not completely, in continuity with the games. This includes the character Edwin, creator of the Mimic in the books. While yes, there is a good chance that Edwin will still exist in Secrets of the Mimic, I'm here to argue why it cannot be one-to-one with the books. For a better understanding of how I'm approaching this subject as a whole, I would recommend watching Gibi's video on the update and its significance, which will be linked in the description. Also, disclaimer, as a busy college student, I have not personally read any of the Tales books, but I have kept up with the information presented within them. Please forgive me if I make a mistake, and please leave a comment if something I said goes directly against the books. Chances are good that I'll see them, and I love hearing other people's perspectives, theories, etc., so fire away. Before I get into Edwin and Henry at all, it is important to address what the update says about the Mimic, and more importantly, what can be tied to the books from it. The first thing it does is show off the Tiger Rock plushie. Now, I will say, I was one of the people who initially thought that a Tiger Rock inclusion was all I needed to see in a FNAF game to prove that the books were in continuity. However, the way it was presented to us in the update is not quite enough for me to say that they are one-to-one with the games. For one, this is not David's Tiger plushie. It's a Tiger Rock plushie, and a shoddy one at that. As many have pointed out, with the zipper on the back, it looks more like it's based on a costume of Tiger Rock than a plushie of a tiger. This alone seems odd to me, but it's not enough for me to deconfirm the significance of the character showing up at all. However, it is worthwhile to mention that this is still our first time seeing Tiger Rock within the games. If it is to be believed that the Tiger Rock character, and by extension the storyteller tree, are important within the books, it seems odd for a digital plushie to be the only time we've encountered it in the games. In the same vein, it strikes me as odd that they chose to put the Mimic in its costume from the Scooper ending for this update. While it may just be to say that the Scooper ending is the true ending, which would make sense, it is framed directly next to this Tiger Rock plushie. The fact that in this shot, you see Tiger Rock and the Mimic in its lion costume right next to it, seems to intentionally be drawing a line separating the two. This seems to support more directly a theory I held back when Ruin was released. That being that the choice of a lion costume was meant to directly separate it from Tiger Rock, and therefore the book's continuity. I still hold that to be true, however, it may be a bit closer than I assumed then. And for those of you who don't think that this is a fair comparison, they could have picked anything. They had other suits in the room with the Mimic, but they chose a lion, not a tiger, and not a bear. Oh my. However, even with these comparisons, the books could still be one-to-one with the games, and we just haven't seen any overlap between the two in any meaningful way. Who knows? Maybe my Tiger Rock just goes to another Pizzaplex, or lives in Canada, or something. The next thing the update does, which was already somewhat obvious, is connect Jackie to the Mimic endo we know from Ruin. This would seem to suggest that the Mimic at one point physically inhabited the Jackie animatronic. Now, this is strange considering Jackie's anatomy is much different than a regular person's, with the stretchy arms and no legs and all, but the Mimic has been known to modify itself to fit different suits, so it is very possible that the physical Mimic endo inhabited Jackie. Also, at this point in the timeline, the Mimic probably wouldn't have legs anyway, so that could be an even better reason for it. What I find more intriguing, however, is how Jackie ties in with the books, or rather, fails to. In the books, the only mention of anything that could be Jackie is the Springlock Jester suit. They are assumed to be of normal human proportions and have their legs, so it is very unlikely that this is Jackie. However, they could be a version of Jackie, or a similar character. That's purely speculation on my part. But the important thing here is that beyond this suit, there is no mention of Jackie within the books. Now, there is a sizable time gap where Secret of the Mimic would most likely take place, which could explain their absence, but it is notable that this is something the books have yet to address. On a similar note, we see MXES at the end of the update being taken away in a van, seeming to suggest it is going where the Mimic is, i.e. the building shown in the double image puzzle. Seeing as MXES is the device made specifically to contain the Mimic, its inclusion here and its implied presence and secret of the Mimic pose a much more pressing issue for the books' continuity. Much like Jackie, MXES does not appear in the books at all, and while Jackie may have been contained entirely to the place we'll be seeing in Secret of the Mimic, MXES is not contained in this way. Its presence, or lack thereof, is an important plot point for how the Mimic is even able to exist in the ways shown in the books. As mentioned by Gregory in Ruin, MXES seems to have been able to trap the Mimic down there for a really long time. And seeing as it is even further down than the FNAF 6 pizzeria, that would suggest that it's been out of the picture since before the fire. We already know that this game will take place in 1979, which would mean that if we are successful in trapping the Mimic by using the MXES machine, it will have been out of commission for the entirety of the FNAF timeline up until Security Breach and Ruin. This line of events would also tie in nicely as to why we are getting this game directly after the events of Ruin. Now, this obviously says nothing about the Mimic 1 program itself, but it does leave a major issue for the books being one-to-one with the games. As the MXES is not present within anything the stories have said thus far, we must assume one of two possibilities. One, the events of Secret of the Mimic were unsuccessful in containing the Mimic. This interpretation would also have to mean that everyone who knew about the Mimic and MXES has either died or given up trying to contain it, which seems unlikely. Or two, MXES does not exist within the book's continuity, thus why the Mimic is left to its own devices for so long. I personally do not see a timeline where the Mimic is able to exist in the ways the books portray if MXES is at play in some capacity. But then again, perhaps there is a part of that I am missing. Regardless, it should not be understated how important the MXES is to the books and the game's continuity. And that is something we should all be looking for when Secret of the Mimic releases. Now let's take a look at the main character this video is about. Henry. Sorry, he's been ignored for so long that I guess even I started to forget about him. Joking aside, this is exactly the point I want to make clear with this video. Until this update, there was a possibility that Edwin was merely the book's proxy to help build Henry's character while telling a different story. If Edwin were to exist in the game's timeline, however, many things we attribute to Henry become unnecessary or subsumed by Edwin. One small example of this, which has much larger implications, appears in the new billboard in 5 Laps at Freddy's. If you're watching this, you probably have already seen it, but it's this billboard. Now, I'll try to be kind when talking about it, but I just have to say, this billboard infuriates me. And you might be thinking, what? How could that be any more significant than the Tiger Rock reveal? But listen, Tiger Rock, despite its lack of stage presence, is solely a representation of the Mimic, so a few differences here and there can be largely overlooked. However, this little f***er implies something awful for the lore of the games, no matter which way you slice it. But before we get into my issues with it, I want to point out the differences between this billboard and the confirmation of William Afton being the Midnight Motorist. Midnight Motorist was something we already had context for, in that we knew what the minigame was generally about. Therefore, adding a spring Bonnie topper to the adaptation of the vehicle from that minigame is enough confirmation of the identity of the driver in the minigame itself. This billboard, while its closeness to the release of Help Wanted 2's update is significant, is referencing a character we have no reference to in the games. So its inclusion should not immediately be taken as a confirmation that Edwin's story plays out the exact same way as the books, or that the character exists in the same capacity in the game's timeline. With that being said, what does this billboard tell us if it is in the game's continuity? Put simply, nothing good, at least not for Henry. The main reason for this has to do with one animatronic, Mr. Hugs. For a long time, it was assumed that Henry was the one to create Trash in the Gang, as well as many of the other animatronics, as his talents for making lifelike animatronics is the sole reason why he is important to William and the story at large. If Edwin exists within the games as stated in the books, this billboard would suggest that he made Trash in the Gang, as well as many of the other animatronics. Putting aside the greater implications for now, simply in this one case with Mr. Hugs, this would cause problems. For one, this design would either have to be a retcon of Mr. Hugs' design, which seems pointless, or another version Edwin made later on to be sold. Assuming this is being advertised around the time that the events of Midnight Motorist would take place, that would mean Roombas existed in the 80s, but whatever, that's just a small detail that bothers me to no end. Anyway, That layer of separation between Hug and Mr. Hugs makes me slightly skeptical, but we don't know quite enough about it to make any solid connections. Regardless, Edwin's presence in this scenario would mean that Henry would have had to have taken less of a role in the creation of the animatronics, and instead, he would have been in charge of creating the actual characters, who Edwin would use to then make animatronic versions of them. This role does not fit Henry's character whatsoever, and entirely disregards his talents as explored in the Silver Eyes Trilogy, as well as his speech in the Insanity ending of Pizza Sim, where he says,
"Small souls trapped in prisons of my making, now set to new purpose, and used in ways I never thought imaginable."
As it stands, this is once again a scenario where I cannot see both of these characters fitting cleanly into the same continuity. This is even further evidenced by the fact that Henry has never been mentioned in Edwin's story, only Fazbear Entertainment as a corporate entity. But this relationship could also be further explained in Secret of the Mimic, so let's move on to... Now, as I stated, I have not read any Tales books, so this is admittedly the section I am least qualified to talk about, so instead I'm going to be going over the general themes represented by Edwin and how his inclusion would affect the games. As I already touched upon, Edwin and Henry both occupy similar roles in their respective timelines, each seemingly being the main creator of the animatronics and the sole character with technical knowledge in creating lifelike animatronics. If this were not the case, Edwin would most likely not have been necessary to Fazbear Entertainment. Just like how he wasn't necessary before the books existed, but I digress. However, the important part of that last sentence is who Edwin worked for, Fazbear Entertainment. It seems intentional that Edwin as a character has been kept separate from both William and Henry, which is hard to believe if he was working for them back in 1979. This separation of referring to Fazbear Entertainment rather than either of its owners says to me that Fazbear Entertainment was either a larger operation and somehow became that before any of the tragedies in 1983, or that William and Henry had less influence over the company than it seems they should have. Hello, Editing Freya here. I just found out that Edwin's age might be another factor for why the books can't be one-to-one with the games, as Edwin is said to be 64 by the time of his death, and is said to have made the Mimic when he was 24. And putting Edwin at being 24 in 1979 would lead to some issues with the time that Security Breach would take place, meaning that it would have to take place around 2019, which will only be a few years after FNAF 3 took place, or a few years before, depending on what timeline you believe. Anyway, that's just a small thing I heard. Shout out RyeToast, and I believe ID's Fantasy, they also brought up this issue, so thank you. That being said, the Mimic is most certainly in the game, and seems to also be tied to the Tiger Rock character in some way. This would imply Edwin at least exists within the game's timeline, whether or not he had as big of a role, unless someone else made the Mimic. And this is probably where I lose everyone watching, but I had this thought, so now the cursed knowledge must be passed on to you. What if Henry made the Mimic? What? Was that not shocking? Okay, but what if I now told you that I think Secret of the Mimic is going to confirm the existence of Sammy Emily from the Silver Eyes? Yep, I'm sure that got your attention. For those of you who don't know, Sammy Emily is the son of Henry Emily and Charlotte's brother within the Silver Eyes. The reader is made to believe that Sammy was kidnapped from Fredbear's family diner, and Charlie saw this happen with her own eyes. However, spoiler warning, it is revealed that Charlie was the one who was kidnapped, or rather was killed in Fredbear's that day. And the Charlie in the books is actually a robot. It is either assumed or directly stated, I haven't read it in a long time, that Sammy was instead taken by Henry's wife after their divorce, or that he never existed, which was what I assumed for the longest time. That being said, how does Sammy fit into the Mimic story at all? Well, assuming Henry was the one who made the Mimic, we would need a kid to fit the role of David. The most obvious answer would be Charlotte, but if Secret of the Mimic takes place in 1979, Charlie wouldn't be dead by then. However, Sammy would work perfectly, and it would provide a better explanation for how Charlie dies as well. In the books, Sammy and Charlie are twins, and they were practically inseparable. David was about 4 when he died. If the death happened in or slightly before 1979, that would make Charlie about 8 or 9 when she dies in the games. This age range would at least make more sense as to why Charlie is allowed to be left on her own, and it would also make a more compelling reason for why she is an outcast. Her brother was her only friend, and after he was gone, nobody wanted to hang out with the sad, lonely Charlotte. Now, I'll admit, do I believe in this theory? No, not really. It would be cool to finally tie in Sammy somehow, but the reason the Mimic was created was because David was lonely. Sammy and Charlie could probably entertain themselves if they had each other. However, Charlie could still potentially fill the role of David in the games, and that would also mirror the Silver Eyes and how Henry becomes angry at the Charlie bots once he realizes what he's done, eventually leading to his self-inflicted death. I refuse to use the word unalive, I swear. If Henry is revealed to have created the game's Mimic, my guess is that it was made for Charlie, and the events went down slightly differently from the Tales books. However, this all leads me to my final point, and the real reason why I wanted to make this video. Now hold on, hey, pitchforks down. I promise there's nuance here. I know at this point it's looking more and more like Steelwool and Scott are looking to the books as a way to tell parts of the story that otherwise would be left unanswered. And I know that this next game will probably be the nail in the coffin confirming a lot of stuff we know from the books. But that's not really why I wanted to make this video. I'm making this as a plea to Scott, Steelwool, and everyone who vehemently believes that the books are one-to-one with the games. Please, do not do this. I love the Tales stories, despite not having the time to read them myself. But in this specific scenario, and for Secret of the Mimic specifically, there is no value in aligning one-to-one with the books. Being so early in the timeline, this would completely shift how we understand every character within this series. Most of all Henry, and I fear once again that a criminally underutilized character will be replaced by someone else just for that character to go underutilized as well. But more than all of that, making the game so intertwined with the books will only alienate a significant portion of the fan base as well. We've yet to see the most important events in this series within an actual game, and adding more layers of separation and retcons and leaps in logic will just strain the already dwindling intrigue that the series has to offer. What do we have left if the books solve everything? Where does that leave the people whose only interest is the games? I started thinking about this after I heard Markiplier talk with Dawko on his podcast Powerwash Pals. Great podcast, by the way. You should watch it if you haven't. And I believe that he said it best.
They've added like this brand new character that's apparently always been there since the start.
Of course.
So some people are a bit like, you know,
yeah, but
what
whatever.
happened to Fredbear and Spring Bonnie? Where are they at? You know, where's that Fredbear game?
Yeah. You know, I think that people are willing to suspend disbelief that of a certain thing. But when you continually ask people to disbelieve more and more, it's almost not fair to the audience, because you're like, okay, souls of children trapped in suits or animatronics, right? That's already, you have to suspend a little bit of disbelief for the magic of what that is. And there you have like more advanced technology in the past. Okay, I can suspend the weirdness of what that is because the payoff was really cool. But then it gets more, you know, there's more disbelief to suspend. There's more things to do. And it's cool, you know, things do get cool. The nightmare kind of thing in Five Nights at Freddy's 4 is like, okay, all right, it's like a kid in a hospital. He's delirious. He's lost his frontal lobe. Okay, that's cool. Wait, no, it's not. Wait, no, you know, okay, all right, maybe I can get behind this. All right, so Springtrap. All right, he's the big evil. No, all right, okay, all right. He's stuck in a suit from him killing the children. Great, there's two. That seems awfully convenient that would happen twice. Okay, all right, I'll suspend my disbelief a little. Oh, there's a mimic that's been there since the very beginning that none of us knew about, and there was no clue about for any of the other things. Okay. Yeah, so it's like, things like that are unfair to people when you've already asked them to put so much of themselves into the story.
If the books become the sacred text that all the fans must work from and read to even understand what's happening in the story, you lose a major part of what made Five Nights at Freddy's so special to begin with. Are there certain things from the books that are undeniable at this point? Yes, I would say so. Things like GGY, Alone Together, Didophobia, and now Tiger Rock seem to all have varying significance to the story of the games, and I'm okay with all of that. However, I don't want people to get so caught up in the books becoming more important that they start to believe that they are the only thing that is important. I would hope anyone like that would agree that FNAF would feel hollow if it weren't for theory and discussion and debate, despite how silly it may get at times, or how sure you may be that you are right or that someone else is wrong. That being said, I think that's where I'll leave things for this video. I hope everyone watching, if anyone is watching, enjoyed this discussion, theory, whatever this was, and I hope that you can see that my intentions in all of this is to bring FNAF to a more narratively satisfying place, while still preserving the fun of theorizing. Not that I believe that would fully go away regardless. Once again, let me know down in the comments any thoughts, theories, or suggestions you have. I'm curious how many people feel similar to me on this issue, or if there's something I missed that might change my feelings on this matter. I also hope that it was alright that this video is mostly my interpretation of the books that I was able to find and or remember. I did try my best to research my points as I went, but you know how FNAF is. It's usually pretty hard to get a solid answer about anything, especially if it's a very specific detail that others might have glanced past. Besides that, I guess I should probably do the YouTube thing and ask you to hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the bell and all that, but honestly, you watching until the end is probably more impactful nowadays. If you do want to help out beyond any of that, please comment. You know what, if you made it this far and you don't have anything to say, just comment "Justice for Sammy" or something like that. If you want to spread that elsewhere, I wouldn't complain either. I plan to make a lot more videos, and if this does well, you can expect the next one to be out pretty soon. This has been Freya. Bye bye. Now, this is strange considering Jackie's anatomy is much different than a regular person's. Alright, I'm gonna have to read that again. For a long time, it was assumed that Henry was the one to create Crash in the Gang. Assuming this is being advertised around the same time that Midnight Moberth? Ew. And after he was gone, nobody wanted to hang out with the sad, lonely Charlotte. If Henry